So Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks has launched a petition to try to get Joe Biden to step down and basically open up the primary so that other Democrats can get involved. Here, this is in Mediaite. They say progressive Cenk Uygur says the thing no one else is willing to say, that's his words, by the way, on the left about, quote, intensely selfish Joe Biden. Here are his tweets on it. Joe Biden says he's running for president again. So what? Why does every Democrat listen to him? Why is it assumed by everyone in Washington that dissent isn't allowed against someone in power? What a weird assumption. I don't agree. 2/3 of Democratic voters don't agree. I'll say the thing that no one else is willing to say. Joe Biden is being intensely selfish by running again. He's putting his ego above the interests of his party and his country. First of all, to answer his question, why does every Democrat have to listen to him? Well, as you can see, the voting population is not listening to him. Like regular Democrats, normie Democrats, average citizens are not listening to him. That's why 2/3 of them basically are like, all right, let's get somebody else in there. In terms of like the power players and the other politicians, Gavin Newsom just did an interview where he was like, oh, no, I'm definitely not going to run against Joe Biden. And I think he even went as far as to say he wouldn't run against Kamala Harris. And Cenk knows the reason why Newsom would say that and why people like Gretchen Whitmer would say that. It's because they are effectively party players. And so they feel like, hey, when the time is right, when it's my turn, if I run then, I'll basically get the institutional support of the DNC and the media, and it won't be viewed as like, hey, I'm jumping in here and I'm jumping in front of the line. It's honestly very similar to how the Republicans used to think back in the day. Back in the day, the Republicans were the party of like, whose turn is it now to be president, right? Like, and that's why you got John McCain and Mitt Romney, people like that, as the party standard bearers and the nominees. But there's been a shift now where it's like the Republicans can't control their base anymore, and their base goes for people like Trump. But on the Democratic side, it does seem like the Democratic Party controls the narrative and controls their base better, and then you have these politicians who are basically waiting in line to be the next person. Now, on the substance of it, is Cenk right? Look, I get it. I understand why everybody would want him to step aside. If for nothing else, for the simple fact that Joe really is like 1,000 years old, and he really is struggling cognitively. And every time he gives a speech, every time he's out in public, everybody's sort of like wincing and watching like, oh my God, what's he going to say next? What's he going to do next? Is he going to randomly wander off stage? Is he going to tell a story from 1976 about Strom Thurmond and embarrass everybody? Is he going to call somebody the wrong name? Just from an optics perspective, yeah, I think that Cenk is right. But at the same time, here's what I'm concerned about too. If Joe Biden were to step aside, what do you think would happen next? I think the most likely scenario is Kamala would be like, okay, it's my turn. And then the media would sort of coalesce around Kamala and try to prop her up. And I got to be honest with you guys, even zombie Joe Biden, who doesn't know where he is, I think he's a better political candidate than Kamala Harris. And by the way, the numbers to this day still bear that out, that Joe Biden, even though he doesn't know where he is polling higher than Kamala Harris is. So when you want to talk about like a deep and profound weakness, Kamala Harris embodies different weaknesses from Biden, but they're actually more severe. And I think that if it was Kamala versus basically any Republican, I think Trump would have a better chance of beating Kamala than he does of beating Biden. I think any generic Republican, if it was somehow magically Nikki Haley or Tim Scott, which I don't think it's going to be, or DeSantis, I think they have a better chance of beating Kamala Harris than they do of beating Joe Biden. And I know that sounds crazy to say, but I also think it's true that there's something about Biden that is relatively inoffensive to normies. He's the doddering old grandpa who doesn't know where he is, but they think, oh, he kind of means well. He's trying to help people around the edges, whatever. And he's more palatable than Kamala Harris is. So, what I would be concerned about if there was some follow-through on this, let's say Joe Biden were to be like, you know what, everybody's right, I'm kind of old, 2/3 of the voters don't want me, etc. I'm going to go ahead and step aside. I think there's many scenarios that could come after that which would be better than Joe Biden being the nominee. But there's also many scenarios that could come out of that that would be worse. Namely, I think the two that would scare me the most is I think Kamala Harris would definitely struggle to win a general election, and I think Pete Buttigieg would too. And I think those are two of the top names that come to mind where the media would try to put them over the edge and make them the next thing. But at the same time, and this is probably what Cenk is thinking, If Biden steps aside, well, then as of right now, all you have in the race is Marianne Williamson and RFK. I think RFK's days are numbered with over 10% in the polling because he's basically sucking up to the right wing all the time, going on conservative news and playing patty cakes with them, going on conservative-leaning podcasts and doing his anti-vax tap dance, which is not going to sell in a Democratic primary. In a Democratic primary, you have voters who, like, revere Dr. Fauci. Now, I don't. But normie Democrats do. And if you're trying to win a Democratic primary, you're going to have to win those voters. And he's out there talking about how Fauci's like a demon reincarnate. So then it would be, like, Marianne would be the one who would benefit, certainly up front. Now, I think that, the establishment would strike back, and then you would have a whole bunch of other candidates jump in it. Obviously, I think Kamala would jump in it. Maybe Mayor Pete would jump in it. And then you have the question marks of, like, is Gretchen Whitmer going to jump in it? Is Gavin Newsom going to jump in it? You have all these things. So there are scenarios where Biden steps aside, where it's like, oh my God, look at that. That's the spark that somebody like Marianne needed. And then she starts getting a lot of momentum because she's had a head start on a lot of other people who might jump in the race. And, she becomes the favorite. And it's like, oh my God, that's great. So if Biden steps aside and that happens, all systems go. That's wonderful. Honestly, even if Biden steps aside and it doesn't pan out for Marianne or RFK, but somebody who's less bad, like a J.B. Pritzker. I think J.B. Pritzker has better politics than Joe Biden. If he were to jump in and become the candidate, okay, that's good. Or even Gavin Newsom, for all of his flaws, they did do sectoral bargaining in California, which is massive for fast food workers. They did sectoral bargaining for the entire fast food industry in California, so they're going to get much higher wages. That's wonderful. They did a public option for insulin, which is phenomenal. That's going to help a tremendous number of people. He also has horrible things like he refused to sign the universal health care bill in California. But net, Gavin Newsom's politics versus Joe Biden's, it might be the case that Gavin Newsom is slightly further to the left than Joe Biden, and so if Biden steps aside, Newsom hops in, and he becomes a standard bearer, that would be better, and it would also be better in the sense that I think he would have a better chance of beating Republicans, even though he comes across like a slimy car salesman, than Kamala or Biden have, right? Or somebody like Tim Walz of Minnesota, who I think is a mega-based. I mean, he would be somebody that if he were to jump in and he were to start surging, that would be wonderful. But the thing that is concerning is if Joe Biden steps aside and then you get Kamala, or Joe Biden steps aside and then you get Mayor Pete, then it's like, oh man, it would have been better off to just take your chances with zombie Biden than it would be to take it with Kamala or Mayor Pete. Now, by the way, I'm curious. I'm curious what all you guys think about this, because I'm trying to run through every scenario if Biden were to step aside. And again, I'm coming up with like maybe 4 or 5 scenarios that are better and 2 scenarios that are definitely worse. But at the same time, I think the worst scenarios are the more likely ones to unfold. So I'm curious what all you guys think about this. Like I said, he launched a petition on this. Obviously, Joe Biden's not going to care. It's really going to come down, with Joe, it's really going to come down to, there's his petition right here. Is he with it enough mentally to continue? Is he with it enough physically to continue? Because homie's going to be in his 80s, bro. His 80s. And that's rough. Some people in their 80s are sharp as a tack. You know, Bernie comes to mind. He hasn't lost a step mentally at all. But some people in their 80s are struggling. You got the Mitch McConnells of the world and the Dianne Feinsteins of the world, and the majority of Americans think, there ain't no way he's getting through a second term. So, to his core point, though, is Joe Biden basically rolling the dice with the country by being the standard bearer on the Democratic side, making it possible that a 91 criminally charged candidate on the other side wins? Yeah, he is kind of rolling the dice. I guess the only counter argument is it's kind of a roll of the dice either way, right? If Biden steps aside and it's Kamala, that's a bigger roll of the dice. If Biden steps aside and it's Mayor Pete, that's a bigger roll of the dice. If Joe Biden, or did I say Kamala? If Joe Biden steps aside and it's Tim Walz, that's less of a roll of the dice, right? If Biden steps aside and it's Marianne, that's less of a roll of the dice. So it's kind of a roll of the dice either way, but I understand where he's coming from in the sense that, you know, they are kind of deluding themselves into thinking it's a layup election with Biden. I do think, I will be honest and say, I think that it's still likely that Biden would defeat Trump, namely because there's 91 criminal charges against him, and he's still super unapologetic, and I think he's guilty of those crimes, and I think that will count against him for sure in a general election. I think the normie population is not going to want to go, they'd rather go for a standard old dude than a guy who might be in prison, right? But it is still a roll of the dice. There's no doubt about it. And it just goes to show you the decrepit nature of our politics, that at this late date, like, these are the options we're considering. You know, this seems more like a bad TV show scripted by young writers who are sort of overreaching. It seems like that bizarre that we're in this position, but we are in this position. So, curious what all you guys think. Like I said, if Biden were to step aside, I see two scenarios that are definitely worse. That would be Mayor Peter Kamala being the standard bearer. I definitely think that's worse. But I could also envision a number of scenarios where it's better. Marianne getting the spark she needs. Somebody like Tim Walz or Gavin Newsom. Tim Walz is way better than Biden. Gavin Newsom is slightly better than Biden, but I think it's kind of debatable, to be honest. Or some other governor who I'm not thinking of who has a better record than Biden. So I don't know. We'll see what happens, but Cenk certainly got the conversation started with this point. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.